Today's topic is how can I optimize costs and lower total spend in AWS? Very popular topic for lots of folks who are in the public cloud, understanding in this wonderful world of everything on demand, how can we control the costs? So who are we? My name is Jonathan LaCour. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Mission. We'll introduce a little bit more about Mission in a bit. My background is obviously technology. Started off my career as a software developer and have done quite a lot of infrastructure as well. So really excited to be here. And joined by Jeremy McClay, who's our Manager of Customer Engagement for FinOps at Mission. Say hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy. Yeah. Okay.
I threw that to you just exactly as I knew you would respond.
Yeah, so great meeting everyone. Yeah, so my background is I was working at AWS customer service about 9 years ago now. Started working with basic support customers who were new developers getting on AWS cloud, trying out the free tier, obviously concerned about cost, and just kind of moved my ranks up through there, right? Going from basic support to developer to business support, and then finally working with enterprise customers. So, and helping out lots of customers and just companies overall reduce their bills with AWS, whether that be knowledge and savings plans, their eyes, or just how to get their usage down. So,
awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Jeremy. Jeremy is one of our black belts of FinOps, so you have the right folks on the call today. So what are we going to do here? So we're going to do a quick introduction to Mission, and then we're going to review sort of the concept of cost optimization in AWS, sort of Mission's best practices, what we've seen. Then we'll go into some success stories with Jeremy kind of leading the way on that front. We'll talk a little bit about how Mission can help, and then we'll get into Q&A. Now, because the purpose of this is to be informative and help those of you who are in attendance, if you do drop your questions in, we'll do our best to pause and address them as we can, because we want this to be as interactive as possible and make sure you get what you need out of the conversation. So feel free to use that chat feature or the questions feature, and we will be monitoring those for your questions. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about Mission. So we are a next generation cloud service provider, and we offer a comprehensive suite of services kind of across the entire cloud lifecycle, including architecture, migration, management, and optimization. And that means that we can kind of be that one-stop shop partner. Our entire approach to our customer base is to be alongside you and help you as a customer, as a business, to be successful in AWS. And that includes everything from doing migrations themselves, assisting with cloud transformation initiatives, CI/CD implementations, infrastructure as code. We have quite a lot of different practices as well, including data analytics, machine learning, cloud native software development, and we do incredible 24/7 services around kind of monitoring, management, incident response, AWS support, and cost optimization as well. So lots of stuff we do, and a little bit about us. We have over 100 engineers, over 260 employees. I actually think we've starting to approach 300 at this point. This slide is, a couple minutes out of date. And we have over 150 AWS certifications on the team. Founded back in 2017, we're 100% remote and have over 400 customers. We only focus on AWS. We do not work with other clouds. We do not do on-prem. Our customers are customers who have been, first movers, and cloud adoption is high in our customer base, and they really just want help with AWS. That's where they are. That's where they want to be successful. Okay, so that's a little bit about Mission as kind of an extension of your own team and our focus on AWS. We are a premier partner, as I mentioned. That means that's the highest tier of validation from AWS. Okay, in terms of things we can do, quite a lot. We have a lot of service delivery designations and or competencies. These are things that AWS kind of vets partners against with case studies and kind of audits of our capabilities. And so you can see there we've just achieved some things: our data analytics competency, the level 1 MSSP competency if you're into security, Redshift, machine learning, And then we have a whole bunch of other capabilities as well: migrations, managed services, life sciences, DevOps, Microsoft workloads. So yeah, we can do all the things. Okay, so now we're going to talk about cost optimization, which is the actual topic of today. And before I do that, I'm going to have a poll be launched really quickly that just sort of helps us understand a little bit about how far along in your cost optimization strategy you are as a business. So if you could fire back up, look at the poll, click one of the answers on a scale of 1 to 5. Let's say 5 is you have it completely under control. 1 is, dear God, I got my bill and I have no idea what to do. And then obviously 2, 3, and 4, everything in between. All right, so we've got a couple people voting now, a couple more. All right, give you one more second. All right, got enough votes now to close the poll. So you are in the right place. Half of you said you have no idea. Half of you said that you have a very small idea about what to do. So you're in luck. We're here to help you out, and I will be sure to focus on everything from the basics on up. That's really exciting. Glad that we have the best attendees here to learn a little bit. So let's talk about cost optimization from the perspective of typical spend, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you a scrubbed graph here. This is an actual customer that we have worked with in the over time at Mission. And you know, one of the things you notice is the cloud has a lot of benefits, obviously: fully self-service, on-demand, consumption-based, lots of power. And you know, once you get that into the hands of your developers, your engineers, your IT team, sometimes without kind of any sort of cost containment or governance strategy, you get this sort of unchecked growth. And we call this the continuous climb. So you need to have pragmatic, strategic cost management techniques, processes as well. So people, process, and tools, right, to fight against this continuous climb. And what tends to happen with organizations in this mode is they make cost optimization a activity that happens from time to time, a periodic thing. And they're addressing it really with Band-Aids. So they'll do like massive RI purchases once a year, and not really be continuously reviewing, do I have the right things in place? Do I need to sell some of these? Should I be on a savings plan? And if you're doing reactive one-time reserved instance purchases, you're probably at the lower end of that kind of cost optimization maturity model that we talked about. So how do we get out of the continuous climb? Well, what you want is, again, real customer here, scrubbed name. You want to be at an ideal spend pattern, which is to say relatively flat, steady state, right? Even though this customer is doing more and more, they're using more infrastructure, their spend, their kind of carrying cost on a month-to-month basis has stayed relatively static. So even if you're growing gradually, you still want to see that steady monthly recurring cost, including the amortization of any one-time purchases, right? And to get to this point, we've done a whole bunch of different optimization techniques. Continuous monitoring, keeping our actions in pace to keep the costs in check. We use cloud-native monitoring tools to increase the visibility that we get into the customer's environment. And we take advantage of some techniques like lifecycle policies, right sizing of instances, purchasing options, private pricing, all that good stuff. So one such technique here is, you can see, to be constantly reviewing opportunities to right size and make smaller, more strategic RI purchases that can be just as impactful. And so you can see that this is possible. We have demonstrated that, but what does it take to do this either on your own or with Mission? Well, first we should talk about sort of the design principles that Mission approaches cost optimization with. So the first is to embrace the consumption model of the cloud. AWS gives you this ability to spin resources up and down on demand and only pay for what you use. So to take advantage of this model, rather than leave idle resources running 24/7, you should embrace that consumption model and turn things off using something like a lights out policy. And if you do have things that are going to be running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's probably a good idea to make a reservation against that instance. So the next principle is to measure your overall efficiency and to tag your resources. And what this is really about is getting a handle on what is actually running in your environment, why they're running, and to be able to actually allocate those costs to different projects and cost centers. And what that does is that creates visibility and helps you to have a more effective cost management practice. Because if you determine this project, which looks like it's not going to end up being something that's productive for the business, is using 30% of your monthly cost, that's a pretty good indicator you should shut that infrastructure down or spin it down to a minimal kind of place. So we should also talk about governance. As we mentioned earlier, kind of the on-demand self-service nature of the cloud, it lends to cloud sprawl, okay? And governance policies can help you kind of maintain and gain control of the growth in your environment. And then there's a whole bunch of significant opportunities for cost saving that arise when you invest in actually evolving your workload. Some of those prior things are really about, techniques against an existing workload without making too much change. If you're able to do things like to re-architect to leverage microservices, maybe to do things like adopting managed services or reduce your licensing burden, these things can make a big dent as well. So those are some of the kind of core principles of cost optimization that we have at Mission. And if you actually look at the life cycle, putting it all together as part of this continuous cost optimization life cycle, you can see that there's quite a lot of work to do. And the key thing to drive home here is that cost optimization is not an event, it is a process. It's this continuous activity. You have to keep it moving. And that's what this cycle is all about. Starting with, kind of usage and cost monitoring, doing some analysis, then optimizing your costs, doing things like terminating unused resources, managed service adoption, RRIs and SPs, right sizing, re-architecture, all of this good stuff. And then governance, right, to make sure you stay in check. Goals and metrics, tagging and cost attribution, resource consistency and forecasting. And it's this continuous cycle that's really important. There's 28 distinct activities here across these 4 phases that really make up a complete cost optimization practice. And while every customer environment and their journey is a little different, we actually recommend that you should continue along this life cycle, right? A continuous process of refinement and improvement. And if you're thinking to yourself, wow, this is a little overwhelming, I definitely can hear you. There's a lot to consider, but the good news is there are tools out there. There are services and systems that can help you get there faster, right? And you don't have to do it all on your own. And you don't have to do it all in one shot. Every little thing here helps. And to that end, let's talk a little bit about how you operationalize cost optimization.
And real quick about that life cycle.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, as scary as that life cycle is, because as you said, there were 28 things, it goes faster after you do it the first time, right? Like, you might be looking at unused resources, and the first time you're going to look at it, there's going to be a lot, but the second time you look at it, there's not as many because you went through the cycle already. And that's really when we see very lean, efficient customers, is when they're able to go through this lifecycle policy or this customization lifecycle fast. Like, they're able to do it as soon as a new project is even thought of. They're like, cool, do it, we're done. So
that's a great point, Jeremy, and you're spot on, right? And this is sort of like developing a muscle, right? You got to do the push-ups and get stronger and stronger at riding this life cycle. And once you do, it becomes something that you just do. It's part of your business. It's how you approach things, and you have a cadence, and you drive yourself to efficiency. So in order to do that, you need people, process, and tools, okay? All 3 of these things are important. You need people that can actually interpret what comes out of tools. They have to actually do things with the information. Just knowing that you can optimize your costs is different than actually optimizing your costs, right? You need process to make sure that this is a continuous activity, that you're monitoring things always, that you're doing cadence reviews and meeting with your different kind of stakeholders in the business to understand how they're using their infrastructure. And finally, you need those tools, right? Oops, sorry about that. You need those tools. You need something like a CMP platform, which gives you kind of in-depth reporting and alerting around your cost. And Mission is partnered with a company called Cloud Health. And it's sort of the leading CMP platform. You can think of it as Cost Explorer kind of on steroids, right? Performance enhanced cost analysis, right? So this is what we use. You can also acquire this tool and you can train up your teams, and but we also can provide all three of these components on your behalf if you're interested. So it's really up to you. You need to be doing these things, and the question is, do you want to be doing it yourself? Do you want to do some of it, or do you need us to do it for you? So I think one of the great things we could do now is just really understand kind of customer case studies. What does it look like in practice, right? We showed some kind of scrubbed data earlier, but I would love for Jeremy now to take over and walk through some actual customer case studies.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Driven. They were one of our customers that we worked with, I want to say a couple of years ago. And by applying a lot of the techniques that we talked about really briefly earlier, but we did in practice here with Driven, we were going to save them about $900,000 a year, right? A lot of that had to do with looking at their spend, driving down what their usage was, making sure that they were being lean and efficient, and that was before we even looked at RIs and SV practices, right? $900,000 a year, that was around $73,000 a month, and their platform remained the same, right? One of my key goals every time I talk to a customer is making sure that anything that we talk about with cost optimization doesn't affect their platform, right? They're going to have the same functionality or better whenever we make these kind of recommendations. So we want to go to the next slide real quick. Yeah, so EC2 is one of the big three services, probably the biggest service I think that AWS has by far. Jonathan can confirm, and it's only getting larger, right? You can also throw in containers along with EC2 and Lambda functions. When we were looking at Driven, we saw that they were just at the beginning of their cost optimization journey, and that was, we're going to buy RIs, and then we're going to make sure that the RIs cover what we think we have running. When we did an analysis and looked at it, we found that they were actually over-provisioning reserved instances. So they weren't just buying what they had running, they were buying for more than what they had running. A lot of this had to do with developers spinning up an instance and saying, yep, this is what it's going to be for a while. And then in the 3 or 4 months afterwards, they said, actually, we're going to change it, probably go to something new. But when you buy a reserved instance, you're locked into a 1-year term. It's just absolute wasted costs after that. So, so one thing that we always make sure that when we talk to customers, it's, do you think this instance is going to be running on the same platform for a long period of time? If yes, then maybe an RI is for you. If you're not sure or not, same as fine. By looking at Driven and helping them with their RI fleet, we were going to save them just $40,000 a month on just that alone. So, next slide. S3 is also another big one, right? Again, one of the big three services that AWS has. Lots of customers, whenever we're talking to them, they put a lot of stuff in standard storage, and it just sits there. They don't know why they have it. They don't know what the objects are. It just kind of sits in buckets, and no one goes through and cleans it up. When we were talking to Driven, that's what we kind of identified. We saw that they had a large amount of petabytes just sitting there in S3 storage. And we were asking questions like, how often do you grab objects from these buckets? And they didn't have those answers, right? So we ran a couple of S3 storage lenses so we could get an idea of what their analytic pattern kind of looked like. We helped identify what a good lifecycle policy would be for S3. And what that does is it takes the S3 objects from the more expensive storage classes, standard storage, and it put it into infrequent storage or even Glacier Archive, right? And just by putting in that lifecycle policy in place, we were able to reduce down the amount of storage they had that was just stale, and get it so it's only about $8,000 a month, which is pretty significant for what they were spending previously. So, next slide. EBS storage kind of goes hand in hand with S3 storage as well, but this is again attached to those specific EC2 instances. Just things that are running. If you over provision an EBS volume, great, you have all the storage available for your EC2 instances, but if you're not using that storage, then you've over provisioned, and similar to like over provisioning how many CPUs you need, it's just a wasted cost. So looking into Driven's environment, we said, hey, here's how big your EBS volumes are. Here's the actual percentage of those EBS volumes you're using. you should consider re-architecting to use smaller EBS volumes so you can reduce costs that way. Also, idle EBS volumes are probably my number one thing I look at every time I meet a brand new customer, just so I can look at it and say, hey, one of your developers probably started an instance, deleted the instance, but the volume is still there, right? And hard drives sitting on your desk do not do you any good. And that's the same thing with these idle EBS volumes. You just stand there.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and the other thing I recall with Driven is I believe we actually converted them from certain volume types to others, right? Because as AWS continuously rolls out new EBS volume types, you get better performance for lower cost. And if you're on these legacy, you have to continuously review that as well, right?
Yeah, provisioned IOPS, right? It's one of the coolest features that EBS volumes have, right? Let me make sure that my input output speed is set at a certain amount so I can go as fast as I need to. But then you look at it, and if you're not using that speed, why are you paying for it, right? Why are you renting the Camaro when you only need a Prius? And GP3 volumes was another thing that got introduced, I think, 4 years ago now. But yeah, so we worked with customers on, hey, here's your provisioned IOPS, here's how much of that you're using, doesn't make sense. Convert over to GP2 or now GP3 and get reduced savings that way. So yeah, awesome. Paying for that speed on provisioned IOPS is significant. Make sure you have workloads designed to take advantage of that speed. So.
And that does show about, that kind of life cycle we discussed. Staying on top of all of the things that AWS is releasing is actually really important as well. So most customers don't use all hundreds of microservices that AWS has to offer. They're usually using a handful, right? And you also can look and see that your cost really breaks down to a small subset of those even. So EC2, S3, EBS, Redshift can be a big cost. So there's, you probably have your cost buckets down to a pretty small level. So actually watching all of the updates and enhancements to those services is really important. Now, that's what Mission exists for, is to stay on top of all the changes at AWS. But it's definitely doable for a business if you have the right people and you put them in an environment where they understand, okay, here's my top 5 or 6 services that I need to stay on top of, and they can do that.
It's also amazing whenever AWS introduces like a new feature or a new service that is related to one of the big ones, but because of a weird name, you don't necessarily get it right away. Babelfish was the new one, I think 6 months ago, that finally went into general availability. And it's great for migrating RDS licensings away from like Oracle and SQL servers to Aurora MySQL, etc. But because of the weird name, Babelfish, not a lot of people are going to translate that directly over to RDS. So
it's a good point. The wonders of AWS's branding.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you want to touch here on the FSx stuff
as
well?
So the file storage, this is similar to what we did with S3, where we recognized that they had a file storage system that was shared between a bunch of EC2 instances. Pretty similar. We saw that all of it was kind of in standard storage. Asked those kind of same questions. Hey, how many of these objects are you using frequently? How many of this is just stale data? Should we consider moving to infrequent access? Move the objects over to infrequent access, save them about $25,000 a month. So yeah, again, storage, objects, what can we do to help out your stale storage? What can we do to put into cheaper solution types? And it's still available to you. Right? Well, if you need that data, it's still there. It's not gone. There's not a delay in getting that data. Just cheaper for you per month. So.
Yeah, people often, I find, overestimate the need that they have for performance, right? Yeah. Or just for things in general, right? Human beings aren't very good at estimating. We're much better at comparing relative size than we are to doing accurate estimates. And, being data-driven is really important. You find a lot of times that customers are on, SSD backed, kind of super high performance or provisioned IOPS. It's like you're not using anywhere near that. But what did this come from? Well, we made some estimates. Okay. Yeah. Well, now you have reality. Let's go back and look at reality.
Yep. Yeah, and I can understand. Some people where they say, well, we might need it, but yeah, you might need it, but there are ways to design your architecture around. So when you do need it, then it kicks off. So
exactly.
those disaster recovery situations that usually we get into conversations with customers with.
Cloud, right? Is you're not walled in. You don't have to buy everything you need. Well, I might need it. It's like, well, if you don't need it right now, don't have it, right? Have the ability to have it as you need to, but don't have it provisioned right today. Okay, let's move on to the next case study here.
Yeah, Immunis AI. So Immunis AI was a biotech startup that we started working with a couple of years ago. And right away, what they were trying to do was take a lot of medical data and be able to run testing and analysis for it for EC2 instances, and then be able to get that back to their end users. And a lot of it was going to be able to help identify early bloodborne pathogens and just other kind of things that medical group requires that I don't understand, but I got the basic principle of, cool, there's a lot of data in S3, we need to run processes through it and then put it back in S3. We helped them reduce their cost by $26,000 and keep the same performance. And really what was cool about this customer is we took something that was an idea, but not a business yet, and make it into a consumable model and create a business for them. And something that I was quite proud to work with directly. So, and a lot of things that we work with here, again, I kind of talked about a little bit with Driven, but EC2, EBS Storage, and S3, those were the big three services that Immunis AI were using, and those are the things that we definitely targeted. The first thing was with our DevOps team was being able to be more efficient at getting that S3 data into EBS and EC2, right? They had a very long, complicated process. We looked at it and said, okay, let's be more efficient with the AWS cloud in order to get this into something that can be done a lot more quickly. And it was great that what normally took, I think, weeks before, now just took a couple of hours for them. So, and then with the next slide, we can see that we were getting them into that data like really quickly. Had the unnecessary conflict of increasing their EBS costs, right? They had petabytes of data in S3, and they needed to run analysis on that petabytes of data. So what they were doing was creating petabytes of EBS volumes in order to attach their EC2 instances, run for the data, and then put it back in S3. And it was just insane what the cost was on these EBS volumes, because normally when we look at customers that talk about EBS, we see a lot of smaller volumes that aren't being used. These were large volumes that were being used, but it wasn't being very efficient. So we talked to them and we said, hey, have we tried any kind of batch processing that we could usually do, and even use AWS batch, right? So instead of creating a large EBS volume that they had to run all their analysis for, they were able to pull the data directly from S3 in smaller chunks, run for their analysis, and put it back in S3. So now we don't have large EBS volumes, we have much smaller consumable EBS volumes that we can terminate pretty quickly. And you can see from the graphs here, the change was just tremendous whenever we started helping them out with that cost. So
I love this graph because it really does show how it feels sometimes for customers. They come to us and going like, oh my gosh, look at this trend line. You're like, okay, and then boom, you know, and batch processing is another really good example of something that if you didn't know about it, right, you wouldn't be able to leverage it. And you're doing completely logical thing here, which is I got to process this off of volume. I can't process it directly in S3, but there are much more efficient and effective ways to do it. And I believe even with batch, you can do things like spot, right, in order to do the processing. And if it's not hypercritical from a timing perspective, you get even better, you know, kind of costs. So.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we started doing with them, was starting to implement spot instances for what they were running, right? First it was, let's make sure the process works using on demand. Now it's cool. Now we know the process works with on demand. Now let's see if we can get it work with spot, make sure we design it so if spot doesn't work, we can spin up some on demand or kind of work out on this. And again, just working with Mission, working with Immunis AI and their customers, we were able to get their costs down. So it's much more reasonable. This is their entire bill here. And yeah, created a business and it was great. So
love it. Yeah. Awesome. So with all that said, thanks, Jeremy. Jeremy his team is populated with other, you know, mini Jeremys, other people like him, who are FinOps experts. We call them cloud analysts. and they tag along with our customers and give them regular reviews and cadence calls. And that's kind of how we go about the optimization process, is to have these experts kind of guide through the process and the tools. And that is actually where we should talk about how Mission can help. So now we've seen how Cloud Health can help you optimize. We've talked about our cloud analysts and sort of the continuous process. We've seen it work in practice now with a couple customer case studies. And I want to be very clear here that my goal out of this conversation is to enable you to be successful in optimizing, right? Now, when I say that Mission can help, I'm telling you that because we can, but a lot of these activities are things that you can do as well. And I'm more than happy to answer questions on that front. If you do have this capability in-house, you just need to goose it a little bit and boost it. We're here to help, okay? So don't take this as you have to do these things this way, right? These things need to happen. Cost optimization process and lifecycle needs to happen for you to be efficient. But you don't have to necessarily do all of it. So as I mentioned, one of the key things we have is something we call Cloud Foundation, and it really represents optimization and support for AWS. So many of you probably are paying AWS for business support or enterprise support. If you're in production, that is highly recommended by AWS to do at least business support. And when you reach a certain level of scale and if you want to do something like an enterprise discount, you need to be on enterprise support. Well, Mission delivers those same enterprise grade support. It's actually backed by AWS's own enterprise support, but using our team. And the cool thing about that is you get a much more contextualized experience from a support perspective, and our team gets to be more deeply familiar with your infrastructure. And in addition to that, you get Cloud Health, right, bundled for free. If you want to go out and buy that yourself, you can totally do that. It costs a couple points, 3 points, I think, on your bill. So whatever it is that you're spending, you spend 3% on top of that in order to get Cloud Health to then save. With Mission, you just get it if you join up with Cloud Foundation. It's based on a resale program, so you have to procure your AWS kind of spend through Mission. But everything is basically the same. The difference is that you get support from Mission, and we can escalate to AWS. Our SLAs are actually better than AWS's enterprise support, and we can be more contextual. And you get a FinOps analyst from Jeremy's team who will do these regular cadence calls. They'll use Cloud Health, which you get as part of the experience, and that's all included, right? So you get simplified invoices that we provide you that are much easier to understand than the AWS standard ones. Cost optimization consultations, AWS savings and RI recommendations, and just general insights, right? Now, if you don't do this, you should have a FinOps person in your business, if not more than one, who's dedicated to doing these things, right? You need something like a Cloud Health. You can use Cost Explorer if you'd like, but that'll only get you so far. And start building this muscle, right? Using the same things that we do. And we've talked through this already, right? You get a bunch of capabilities here from kind of cost management, governance, these cadence calls. So for those of you who are like, okay, that's great, but I ain't got time for that right now, and I need to save money right now. I'm guessing that there are people here in the audience today who are living in the same economy that I'm living in, and realizing that now would be a really good time to introduce some cost savings so that I can continue to thrive in the current market. And Mission does have something we call the Instant Discount Program, where you can get up to 5% off your bill away for a year. And not everyone will qualify for 5%. Some people will qualify for less, but everybody can get some level of savings, we believe. And it's pretty great because you just, join up with our Cloud Foundation program. You get, 5% discount perpetually for a year. And then, usually with our customers, we average, about a 15% reduction in spend above and beyond that within weeks to months, right? We're really, really good at it. And then we have something a little bit more high-powered for those of you who have, a larger amount of spend that you really want to go after. And this is something you can start with the Instant Discount Program at kind of that 5%, and then you can dive into the Reserved Instance Optimization Program, REO. And this actually puts reserved instances and savings plans sort of on autopilot, right? Our team is continuously reviewing and managing in the back end the purchasing and application of RIs and savings plans. And we do this with no capital outlay from the customer, right? So typically, if you're going to go out and buy RIs, you have to put some money down up front in addition in order to get the best discounts, right? And what we're able to do is get 90% plus optimization, and we do all of the management and purchasing of RIs and savings plans using the best tool for the job. And you get things like the 3 RI savings without the 3 RI commitments. And this all works because Mission has sort of an internal marketplace that we're able to, if you have an RI that's in your environment that's no longer applicable, we can automatically sell that for you, right? And just make it all happen on the back end, or we can move it to a different customer who will get the value. And ultimately what you get is you're not having to put any money out and you're getting massive savings. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I can't talk enough about how Rio just reduces your time in that the customization cycle, right? Because where a lot of customers kind of focus on is they hire someone specifically to handle RIs and savings plans. And they do that once a year purchase, maybe once a quarter, reduce it down, and then that's the only thing they do every time is I'm going to buy RIs, buy RIs, or buy RIs. By Rio taking over that side of it, then your customization experts in-house then focus on other things. Usage. How do I reduce my usage? How do I make sure we're being more efficient with other services besides just our savings plans? So.
Governance, all of those other aspects of the lifecycle. AWS has this great phrase, undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? And you want to offload as much of that undifferentiated heavy lifting as possible. If you're not an expert at this, or you don't have the capital that you want to put towards things like RIs and savings plans, it's a really great way to go, right? Okay. So let's also talk about, ReArchitecture. So we did mention that you can go through all these other kind of programs where we're effectively using financial mechanisms, things like commitments, things like, discounts that we can provide you from an, instant discount program, your traditional kind of cost optimization without touching the workload. Another area you can really use to maximize your savings is to re-architect where it makes sense. It doesn't mean that you have to re-architect your entire workload, but if you think about an RI, a 1-year standard RI on average will save you 30% over on demand. But if you implement a lights out policy, for instances that can be shut down for 8 hours at night, you can actually cut your cost by half, right? So some of these things can be pretty simple. You can also break down monolithic workloads into smaller independent microservices. And the cool thing about that is that you can scale them independently. And instead of having to scale up your entire monolith and scale back your entire monolith, you're only scaling what needs to be scaled. You can move off of self-managed infrastructure to fully managed AWS services, RDS, DocumentDB, Elasticache. These things are all valuable to you to kind of reduce your operational costs, which is sort of a hidden cost that won't show up in Cloud Health, right? But it's really important. You can redeploy those people to do other things. Licensing is also a big problem. If you're using things like SQL Server or using Oracle, moving to services like Aurora can make a huge impact. And AWS has a whole bunch of different ways to do that, and we have the ability to help with it too. So a lot of these opportunities we will surface in our Cloud Foundation kind of conversations with you, with your cloud analyst, but your team will very likely be able to find them as well. And if you have the internal resources to execute against those, that's great. And if not, that's another thing that Mission can actually do is do the heavy lifting for you, right? It's like, oh, I need to implement a lights out policy, but I ain't got time. No worries, we got you. So if we put all this together, how are you going to get from here to there, right? How do I get started? So here is a path you can take to start that journey. So first, don't try to tackle everything at once. Use something like Trusted Advisor or Cloud Health if you have access to it to target kind of low-hanging fruit, right? Quick wins. Unused resources like zombie instances or unused EBS volumes, which Jeremy mentioned earlier, big benefit. Then you can explore the financial tools like RI, savings plans, and you can do those where it makes sense. You don't have to purchase a lot of them. Don't purchase them all at once in a reactive mode. Try to be strategic. Focus on some well-known steady state workloads to start with that are running on newer AWS instance types. If you have legacy instance types, which you plan to change later, don't worry about that. Focus on compute savings plans or look at something like Rio. And then you have to actually get to that point where you're measuring continuously, right? You want to avoid falling back into the continuous climb, and you need to leverage things like CloudWatch there, cloud native tools like Cloud Health that can provide strong policy engines for better governance. And once you have all that governance and visibility in place, you can monitor and refine as needed. You can have set up some internal conversations on a regular basis to review what you see. And build effort versus savings impact matrices to help you keep focused. Yes, I could re-architect this, but it's only going to save me $3,000, and I'm going to spend 5 months implementing this. That's not worth it, right? And if you feel like you need additional resources to help or second pair of eyes, find a partner like Mission, right? We can do things like IDP, Cloud Foundation, Rio, to kind of help you get there. At a minimum, if you have a few minutes to kind of respond at the end, check out IDP. There will be a link, that you can click on, and we'll try to put that in the chat actually, if possible, team. But what I'd like to do now really quickly is run our last poll before we jump into Q&A. And we have 20 minutes for Q&A, which is great.
My favorite part.
So based on today's conversation, do you think you would benefit from a conversation with the Mission Cloud Advisor? So this is basically like, look, was this helpful to you? Do you think that you would like to talk to somebody about how you can do this on your own or how we can maybe help you? And seeing some responses roll in here. Fantastic. Right, give another minute or so. I certainly enjoy the conversation every time. Every time I walk through this, Jeremy always brings up new things that I hadn't considered. So it's always good to have this with Jeremy. Okay, let's go ahead and show the results, and all of you think that it would be valuable, and that's lovely. I'm glad to hear it. So let's jump into Q&A. So the first one is how to measure power consumption and carbon footprint consumed by an organization. And this is a really interesting question. This is obviously becoming a hot topic now, or has been over a while. I believe AWS announced back in March something called the Customer Carbon Footprint Tool. And you can actually use this service on AWS to do just that, to estimate what your carbon footprint is, carbon emissions generated from your AWS usage in general. So that's a way to do it. I believe it's free, which is super cool. Anything to add to that, Jeremy?
Yeah, so kind of what I got from reviewing over the blog post that you talked about, it does take advantage of the cost and usage report, right? Which is my favorite report out of AWS because it's the most detailed report. Whenever I get questions, I can go from there. So it's kind of cool that it uses that. So by just answering the question of your carbon footprint, if you have questions later that AWS or someone says, well, you need to look at the curve because you report for that, you have it already created. You can go into it. And I would say most of the time when you're looking at power consumption, you're going to be looking at usage, and taking advantage of microservices would be that way of reducing your power consumption or to reduce your carbon footprint. So Lambda is probably going to be big for you, containers, microservices, those kind of things. So
absolutely. Ooh, okay. Got another question here that just came in. I am new to this organization and need to reduce my RDS footprint to bring down the cost to our company. How can I go about doing that?
Couple different ideas I have here. First one, I kind of made a reference to it a little bit earlier, but what type of RDS operating engine are you using? Whether it's SQL Server, Oracle. If you're using one of the more expensive licensing products, then converting over to AWS Aurora would be one to reduce your footprint right away, right?
Yep.
Now, converting from Oracle over to Aurora MySQL can be a challenge, and some customers that I've talked to like, yeah, we'll look at that a year from now, 2 years from now. So let's look at more immediate impacts. Checking reports on your databases to see how many have connections and how many don't have connections is probably going to be important, right? I see lots of customers with read replicas that have no connections over the course of a month. And that's technically an idle database, but it is a read replica, and I get it. But if you really need to read replica if there's no connections going over to it, right? So something to kind of think about. And then if you look and say, you know what, licensing is going to remain the same. We're not going to reduce our idle read replicas. We like the CPU and the RAM usage of our databases. Then we're going to talk about RIs at that point. So, yeah, so kind of
excellent.
Yeah, applying that quick lifecycle policy right there. It's, do we need to re-architect? Are we using things effectively? If both of those are yeses, then make a consumption to RDS, or to AWS RDS with an RI. So, and hopefully we'll get savings plans for RDS sometime soon.
I know. I keep on feeling like, and it could be any day, right? I have a feeling reInvent might be where we see that, but who knows?
Yeah, it's one of those things where just me talking to buddies who are also in the industry, I'm always like, yeah, maybe this year's reInvent. Okay, not this year's reInvent. Maybe next year's reInvent. All right, maybe next year's reInvent. So.
Nice. Well, keep the questions coming, folks. Any more questions that we have? While I'm waiting on that, I'm going to go ahead and put up this slide so that those of you who are in attendance who would like to, you can kind of go to missioncloud.com/IDP to learn a little bit about the instant discount program and kind of see if you're eligible. So those of you who said, I'd like to talk to a cloud advisor, this is one of the best ways you can do it. You can call us on that phone number at the bottom, or you can email us. I'm going to give another minute for any questions, and if I hear none, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Here we go, another question. GP3 storage for EBS volumes. What are they? What's a good use case for them?
Yeah, GP3 storage. So it's the new general purpose storage type for EBS volumes. What are they? So again, EBS volumes come in a couple of different flavors, right? For most use cases, and especially use cases where you don't know if you need a performance increase, general purpose is kind of the way to go. And if the instances are in a region where GP3 is available, I would say always use GP3, right? The only times I would say not to use GP3 is if you know you're creating like a backup volume on your EC2 instance, then you might want to use a magnetic storage or a cold storage, right? So you can get some savings that way. Yeah. Or if you know it's like a database server where you need a level of performance guaranteed, and then I would use provisioned IOPS. Again, I would be cautious because provisioned IOPS can be and is much more expensive. GP3 is kind of the bread and butter, what most customers would want to use or at least try out. It's 20% cheaper than the previous general purpose storage, GP2. It also has a higher input output per second at a base level of 3,000. And the only time when GP2 has a higher than that on performance is if we're talking about anything over 1 terabyte. If you're creating volumes over 1 terabyte, then I'm going to say make sure you're using all that 1 terabyte and you're not just creating a large volume so you can have a large volume.
Right.
And not only that, but GP3, you can actually set the input output to what you want. So it's kind of that nice halfway point between provisioned IOPS and GP2, where if 3,000 is not enough for you, you need 5,000, you can set it to 5,000. You're going to pay for it, but it's still cheaper than provisioned IOPS, and yeah, in the long run, it's going to be cheaper than GP2. So
yeah, and the GP stands for general purpose. So that's the thing is, it's sort of a good default. It's a good place to start. You don't really fully necessarily understand the characteristics of what the profile is going to look like from a usage perspective. But yeah, it's faster and it's cheaper, which is nice. I'm looking forward to GP4 and GP5. GP6 Tokyo Drift, right? I think is what it's going to be called. That's how that works.
Family.
All right. Well, I think we're out of questions. We got a little bit of time left, but I feel really good that we got through some great questions. Thank you for sharing those. As always, Jeremy, very enjoyable to go through this with you. And thank you to the audience for attending. We look forward to hearing from you and talking with you about how we can help. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody.